Today, I'd like to introduce you a paper from the magazine Mutilmodal Transportation. It's called Evaluation of 3 Collaboration and Profit-Sharing Methods for Carriers in Pickup and Delivery Problems, whose author is Bhavya Padmanabhan. I hope you can learn something. This study examines 3 methods of collaboration and profit sharing for less than truckload (LTL) carriers. The collaboration methods are evaluated under the scenario that all participating carriers share some or all of their pickup and delivery jobs with a central authority who will assign jobs to carriers and determine optimal vehicle routes to maximize profit. The novelty of this work is that it allows carriers to retain some of their jobs. Collaboration Method 1 is a step approach, where the first step involves the central authority determining the job allocation for the shared jobs and the vehicle routes for each carrier that includes their retained and allocated jobs to maximize total profit. The second step involves dividing the total profit among the carriers using a contribution-based profit-sharing model. Collaboration Method 2 is a one-step approach, where the central authority simultaneously determines the job allocation and vehicle routes, and at the same time, allocates profit to the carriers with fairness constraints included in the model. Collaboration Method 3 is also a two-step approach similar to Method 1, except that in the first step, the central authority determines the job allocation and vehicle routes for only the shared jobs, not including retained jobs. Mathematical models and solution algorithms based on large neighborhood search (LNS) are proposed for all 3 methods. The numerical experiments are conducted using hypothetical networks with up to 30 jobs and 3 carriers. Results indicate that on an average the total profit from Method 1 is 5.3% higher than that of Method 2 and 11.88% higher than that of Method 3. The total profit from Method 2 is 6.6% higher than that of Method 3. In Method 1, the carriers need to share information on both retained and shared jobs with a neutral central authority. Method 1 is a two-step approach. In the first step, the central authority determines the shared jobs allocation and vehicle routes for carriers to serve both retained and shared jobs to maximize the total profit. In the second step, the total profit is shared among the carriers fairly, using cooperative game theory. Hence, the post-collaboration profit of each carrier is not correlated with the work performed. Note that in Method 1, the central authority collects revenue from both retained and shared jobs, and the total profit is calculated by subtracting the total transportation cost from the total revenue. Therefore, in Method 1, the carriers must be willing to share revenue from their retained jobs with the other carriers. Similar to Method 1, Method 2 also requires the carriers to share information on both retained and shared jobs with the central authority. However, Method 2 is a one-step approach in which the optimal job allocation, route building, and profit allocation are done concurrently. In contrast to Method 1, each carrier executes the plan from the central authority and collects revenue from the customers they served. Hence, the post-collaboration profit is correlated with the work performed. Method 1 and Method 2 require that all carriers share information on their retained jobs with the central authority as mentioned in the above paragraph. In practice, some carriers may not be willing to share this information, and thereby not be willing to join the collaboration. Therefore, this study also assesses the benefits of carriers joining the LTLCCR with and without sharing the information on retained jobs. This is achieved by considering a third method, Method 3, in which the carriers will not share information on their retained jobs. Method 3 is also a two-step approach similar to Method 1, except that in the first step, the central authority only determines the vehicle routes for the shared jobs, as the information on the retained jobs is not available to the central authority. Hence, the central authority collects the revenue from only the shared jobs, and then distributes it to the carriers. Similar to Method 1, the profit from shared jobs, when distributed to the carriers, is not correlated with the work performed. In Method 3, carriers keep the revenue from their retained jobs. Figure 1 shows the differences between the three proposed collaboration methods graphically. The differences are also presented in a matrix form shown in Table 1. The objective of this study is to develop mathematical models to solve the LTL-CCR problem, using the three collaboration methods proposed, and then compare the total profit and individual carriers' profit from the three methods. The research questions dealt with in this study are: 1. How much profit carriers will have to give up in order to keep the revenue from their retained jobs, Method 1 versus Method 2, and 2. How much profit carriers will have to give up in order not to share the information on their retained jobs, Method 3 versus Methods 1 and 2. In addition, this study aims to provide insights on stability of coalitions. The first is problem description of LTL carrier collaboration with retained jobs. In the proposed problem, it is assumed that a group of carriers wish to collaborate and form a coalition. The coalition of all carriers is called the Grand Coalition, while a coalition of two or more members of the Grand Coalition is called a sub-coalition. It is assumed that each carrier initially receives jobs directly from the customers. Each carrier is permitted to retain and fulfill any of the jobs they receive. The remainder of the jobs are released to a common pool, and these jobs are allocated to coalition members by a neutral central authority. The LTL-CCR problem is addressed using three collaboration methods, which are explained in detail in subsequent paragraphs. The second is mathematical model formulation. The LTL-CCR problem network defined by Padmanabhan is adopted here. Note that the network described in their work is applicable for both collaboration method 1 and method 2. For method 3, the pickup and delivery nodes of retained jobs of each carrier are removed from the lists PK and DL, since each carrier served their retained jobs and no information about them is released to the central authority. The formulation of the LTL-CCR models under three different collaboration methods is discussed in detail below. The third is solution methodology. Model 1 and Model 5 belong to the class of non-deterministic polynomial time-complete problems, because these models are extension of the VRPPD. Thus, all known algorithms that yield an optimal solution require exponentially increasing computational time as the number of jobs increases. Therefore, a solution methodology based on LNS is used to solve the models. The details are provided below. The solution methodology developed by Padmanabhan is adapted in this study to solve Model 1. To solve Model 5, the LNS heuristic developed for Model 1 is used with some modifications in the insertion heuristic. This paper investigated three collaboration methods for the proposed LTL-CCR problem to determine the trade-off between the requirements of the partnership and the associated profit. Method 1 is a two-step approach. In the first step, the central authority determines the shared jobs allocation and vehicle routes for carriers to serve both retained and shared jobs to maximize the total profit. And in the second step, the total profit is allocated to the carriers fairly, using a contribution-based profit-sharing model. Method 2 is a one-step approach, in which the optimal job allocation, route building, and profit allocation are done concurrently. Method 3 is also a two-step approach similar to Method 1, except that in the first step, the central authority determines the vehicle routes for only the shared jobs. Mathematical models developed by the authors and others were adapted or extended in this study. Contributions were also made in the development of LNS heuristics to solve Models 1 and 5, which are the NP-hard problems. Numerical experiments were performed on hypothetical networks to compare the total profit and individual carriers' profit for the three collaboration methods. Under different scenarios, results from these experiments indicated that On average, the carriers will have to give up 5.6% of their profits if they do not want to share the revenue from their retained jobs. Methods 2 versus 1. On average, the carriers will have to give up 12.5% of their profits if they do not want to share information about their retained jobs. The experimental results also showed that the LNS heuristics developed for models 1 and 5 provided a good solution in a reasonable amount of time for all problem sizes considered. This study has a few limitations that need to be considered when interpreting and applying the findings. First, the experiments were performed on hypothetical benchmark networks. Second, the maximum number of carriers in the coalition considered was 3, and the maximum number of jobs per carrier was 10. Third, pickup and delivery routes were constructed using Euclidean distances, and it was assumed that the added cost of serving another job is simply the travel distance. In reality, the actual network travel distance will be longer. The route to a new job may have heavy recurring congestion, which adds to cost, and the route to the new job may include toll roads. Lastly, the allocation of shared jobs to coalition members by the central authority did not consider competitive advantage of different carriers. In reality, some carriers may not be able to take on additional jobs due to limited number of trucks and drivers, and it may cost one carrier less to do a job than another carrier due to its more fuel-efficient vehicles and lower labor cost. Future work could extend the idea of carrier collaboration to include the sharing of depots. It could also extend this work by developing solution approaches for solving problems with a large number of carriers in a grand coalition. In addition, future work could also be extended to evaluate the fairness of different profit-sharing schemes.